Welcome back to Animal Quests. Today we are looking at 7 encounters across 4 continents, wealthy individuals, expensive assets, and the moment the natural world reminded them that money buys nothing in the wild. From a Nile crocodile waiting at a Zambian riverbank where a man had stepped off his private charter boat to check the path ahead, to a saltwater predator sitting invisible in an Australian billabong while a warning sign sat 12 miles back on the station track. But first, we start in the Montana wilderness, where a grizzly bear finds a $2 million Lamborghini on a remote logging road, and the man who steps out to deal with it. It was August 22, 2015, on a remote logging access road threading through the lower slopes of the Gallatin Range in southwestern Montana. The road was unpaved but had been recently graded for timber operations, making it passable for most passenger vehicles during the dry summer months. The nearest town sat roughly 40 miles to the east. On a weekday afternoon in late summer, the road saw almost no traffic. Trevian Hollenbeck, 44, was a private equity investor based in Denver, Colorado, who had accumulated enough by his early 40s to redirect a significant portion of his time and money elsewhere. The one pursuit he was most serious about was his vehicle collection. Unlike most collectors, Hollenbeck believed cars were meant to be driven. He regularly took rare vehicles on long-distance road trips and kept detailed records of every route. Friends thought it was reckless. He considered it the only way to truly own them. The car he had brought to Montana was a Lamborghini Reventon Roadster, one of only 15 ever produced, valued at roughly $2 million. He had trailered it from Denver and spent 2 days running it on ranch roads and lower mountain routes outside Bozeman. This logging access road had been on a list he maintained. He had driven it once before, the previous summer, without incident. He had also brought food, a cooler packed with bottled water, hard cheese, cured meats, and trail mix sat behind the seats, the only space in the 2-seat Reventon large enough to hold it. Sealed or not, the smell was the kind wildlife could pick up from a long way off. About 3 miles in, Hollenbeck slowed and pulled off the track. Investigators believed he noticed movement at the tree line ahead. He stopped the car, left the engine idling, and stepped out to get a better look. He had encountered black bears on drives through this kind of terrain before and considered them a nuisance at most. What he was looking at through the tree line was not a black bear. The yellow Lamborghini stood out against the dark timber like a warning flare, and by the time Hollenbeck realized the bear was interested in the vehicle, it was already closing the distance. I think this is exactly the kind of decision that makes complete sense in the moment and makes no sense in hindsight. He had driven this road before. He had seen bears before. He probably figured stepping out for a better look was no different from any other time. That's what familiarity does. It turns warnings into background noise. Grizzly bears are among North America's largest land predators. Adult males commonly weigh between 400 and 700 pounds and can reach speeds near 35 miles per hour. Their immense strength, powerful forelimbs, and exceptionally strong bite make them one of the continent's most formidable animals. The bear moved toward the car, clawing at the rear engine cover and side intake before working its way toward the cabin. Damage at the scene suggested it then climbed partially onto the car. Claw marks raked across the rear deck and quarter panel, and the driver's side window shattered from the outside in. The cooler was found approximately 15 feet from the vehicle, dragged out through the broken window, its contents scattered. It was at this point, investigators believe, that Hollenbeck made his decision. As the bear struck the window, he began shouting and moved toward the vehicle, apparently trying to drive the animal off before it did more damage. The bear dropped from the car and turned toward him. What happened next was reconstructed largely from the ground itself: drag marks, disturbed soil, and the final resting positions of both men and animal tracks. The bear closed the 30 feet in under 2 seconds, investigators estimated. Hollenbeck had no time to reach the car and no clear path to outrun it. Based on the physical evidence and scene documentation, Hollenbeck was located roughly 30 feet from the driver's side door. The injuries were consistent with a high-force strike followed by a sustained mauling. Evidence at the scene indicated he had been partially consumed, which investigators noted was consistent with documented behavior in a small number of grizzly fatalities in the Rocky Mountain region. A logging crew transiting the road the following morning discovered the vehicle and radioed for assistance. DNA recovered from hair and saliva samples collected at the vehicle was consistent with a grizzly located approximately 2 miles from the site the following week by Montana wildlife officials, who confirmed it as a food-conditioned individual, having reportedly been involved in previous incidents with unsecured food and vehicles in the area. It was euthanized under state management protocol. The car sustained extensive damage, deep scoring across the rear panels and intake, a shattered window, and a punctured rear tire, with repair estimates reaching hundreds of thousands of several components requiring custom fabrication due to the Reventon's rarity. While the Gallatin Range had claimed Trevian-Hollenbeck in the space of one unplanned stop, the Luangwa Valley would prove that the water's edge carries its own consequences for those who step too close. It was June 14, 2016, in the Luangwa Valley of Zambia's eastern province. The dry season had been running for several weeks, pulling water levels down across the lower river channels and concentrating wildlife near the remaining pools and crossings. The area is remote and accessible mainly by a seasonal four-wheel drive track cut through mopane woodland and open flood plain, a road network that becomes impassable in the rains and navigable for only part of the year. The Luangwa River corridor runs through one of the most ecologically dense stretches of southern Africa, with significant predator populations on both land and in the water. Delwayo Mwana, 51, was a Lusaka real estate developer who owned commercial properties across Zambia and was developing a farming and ecotourism venture in eastern province. He typically reached the remote site by private riverboat along the Luangwa River, completing the journey safely on 2 previous visits. Traveling with him on this trip was his son, Tariko, 22, who had completed his first year of a business degree in Cape Town and was spending part of his university break accompanying his father. The vessel was a private charter riverboat, a flat-hulled aluminum craft fitted with a canopy, long-range fuel tanks, and seating for 6, hired through an operator based in Mafue. It was well-suited to the shallow, sandbar-heavy stretches of the dry season Luangwa. Mwana directed the charter pilot to moor at a low sandbank approximately half a kilometer below the property boundary, where the river curved close to the track that led onto his land. He stepped off the boat and onto the bank to walk ahead and assess the path, a crossing of roughly 25 feet of exposed sand between the waterline and firmer ground above the bank. Tariko remained on the boat. The water was calm, the bottom visible in places as pale sand, the surface carrying no obvious visual threat. In prior visits, the river had behaved predictably at this section. Nothing on the surface that afternoon appeared different. This was not reckless behavior. Checking a riverbank before committing a route on foot is standard practice. What made it dangerous was not the decision, but the season and the section of river. I think this is the part of the story that gets overlooked. Mwana wasn't being careless. Assessing a landing bank before moving ahead is the sensible thing to do. But the Luangwa Valley during dry season is one of the highest crocodile density river systems in southern Africa. A calm, sandy bank is exactly the kind of crossing a large Nile crocodile positions itself below. And calm water doesn't mean empty water. Nile crocodiles are among the largest reptiles on Earth, with large adults often exceeding 12 feet in length and weighing more than 900 pounds. Ambush predators, they remain, concealed beneath the water before launching with explosive speed. Their bite force ranks among the highest ever recorded in a living animal. The investigation could not determine precisely when the crocodile took position at the bank. According to Tariko's account to Zambian wildlife authorities, his father had moved to approximately mid-thigh depth, roughly 7 to 8 feet from the waterline, when the water erupted beside him. The animal struck him laterally and pulled him downstream in a single motion. He did not surface. Tariko ran to the bank but could not locate his father. The water had gone murky with disturbed sediment within seconds of the impact. Tariko returned upstream to a ranger outpost about 20 kilometers away and reported the incident. Investigators arrived before dark and found drag marks, disturbed sediment, and clothing traces consistent with a Nile crocodile attack. Mwana's remains were never recovered, and the case was closed without further management action. Tariko navigated that river alone for 20 kilometers back to that ranger outpost. I keep thinking about what that journey is, what you do with your hands on the wheel when you know there is nothing left to go back for. The Luangwa River had taken Delwayo Mwana at a bank he had assessed before. In Uganda, the danger moved through open grassland, and it moved faster than anyone on horseback could outrun. It was March 7, 2014 in western Uganda, within a private concession bordering a protected wildlife area near Queen Elizabeth National Park. The concession consisted of open grassland, acacia woodland, and a network of dirt safari tracks regularly used by guides and visitors. The area supported substantial populations of African elephants, Cape buffalo, Uganda kob, and numerous bird species. During dry months, wildlife gathered near water sources and grazing areas, making late afternoons peak for game viewing and horseback safaris from lodges. Akello Nakabuye, 38, ran a boutique safari operation out of Kampala. He had built the business over a decade, having left a corporate career in Nairobi to develop a small fleet of mobile camps and customized itineraries for high-end travelers across East Africa. The concession's horseback program was one of his most requested offerings, a way of moving through the landscape quietly and at animal level, with a presence in the terrain that no vehicle could replicate. He carried his own camera equipment and often led rides himself on smaller private bookings. His husband, Alistair Grange, 44, was a British infrastructure investor based in Kampala. He had ridden with Akello at the concession several times before. On this particular afternoon, he had joined the excursion between his own work work commitments in the city. A local guide employed by the concession was leading the ride. The three of them had been out for approximately 40 minutes when the guide slowed their horses near a lightly wooded clearing where a solitary elephant was feeding roughly 60 feet from the path. The afternoon light was flat and low, conditions that reduce contrast across the landscape and make subtle animal movements harder to read at a distance. Okello had shifted slightly in the saddle to photograph a pair of African fish eagles perched in a nearby tree. Alistair remained facing the elephant. The animal appeared calm and showed no obvious signs of agitation. What gets me about this one is that he knew this concession. He had ridden it multiple times, on the same horses, with the same guide, and nothing had happened. But elephants don't always advertise what they're about to do, and sometimes the one standing quietly in the distance is the one you should be watching most closely. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth, with adults commonly weighing between 10,000 and 14,000 pounds. Capable of exceeding 20 miles per hour, they can cover ground surprisingly fast, and an aggressive individual can leave nearby people or animals with almost no time to escape. According to the local guide's account to Ugandan wildlife authorities, the elephant's charge began abruptly and without the warning behavior he would normally expect. The animal accelerated directly toward the group from the left. The guide wheeled his horse and called for the others to do the same. Okello's horse pulled away. Alistair's reared, threw him, and fled. The elephant struck Alistair with trunk feet. Okello returned, hit before it moved into bush. The guide remained near the clearing and radioed for assistance. A concession patrol reached the location approximately 25 minutes later. Alistair Grange was pronounced dead at the scene. Okello Nakabue succumbed to his injuries before evacuation could be completed. Post-incident findings attributed both deaths to blunt force trauma consistent with an elephant attack. Wildlife authorities identified the animal as a large adult predators, known to regularly move through that section of the concession and believed to have been in must at the time of the incident. No management action was taken against the elephant. The guide waited beside that clearing for 25 minutes. 25 minutes of knowing what the elephant had done, knowing there was nothing he could do but wait for help to arrive. I don't think there is a version of that wait that ever gets easier. Uganda had taken both Okello and Alistair within minutes of each other. In Tanzania, it would take only one decision, one step away from the group, for everything to change permanently. It was July 19th, 2021, on a private wildlife concession in northern Tanzania, approximately 30 miles from the boundary of one of the country's most strictly protected wildlife corridors. The concession operated under a combined photographic and hunting permit and ran a small lodge catering to guests who wanted an open, unstructured experience. A private hot air balloon safari offered pre-dawn flights over plains, champagne landings, and strict rules keeping guests within 10 meters of the basket. Rashad Devereaux, 56, was a hotelier and hospitality investor from Martinique in the French Caribbean. He had developed a portfolio of boutique properties across the eastern Caribbean and southern France and had been traveling to Africa for photographic safaris for the better part of a decade. He owned a substantial collection of camera equipment, maintained a large library of wildlife images, and considered himself an experienced bush traveler, comfortable with the landscape, familiar with the protocols, and confident enough in his reading of animal behavior to feel that certain rules were designed for less seasoned visitors than himself. His wife Mireille, 52, a former concert pianist turned arts patron, accompanied him on most African trips. She did not share the same intensity around photography and generally deferred to Rashad's judgment on field decisions. The balloon had set down at first light in short grass on the open concession plain. The landing site sat approximately 60 feet from where a lion pride was resting. 8 individuals, including 3 adult females, 2 subadults, and 1 large adult male, resting broadside to the early morning sun. The pilot had spotted them from the air and committed to the landing, as the distance was considered a safe buffer with the basket between the guests and the pride. The light was ideal for photography. The male was positioned exactly as a photographer would want. Rashad shot from beside the basket for several minutes, which remained within the permitted boundary. Then he moved to one side for a different angle. Then he stepped further, past the 10-meter mark, to get below the grass line. According to Murray's account to Tanzanian wildlife authorities, Rashad had moved beyond the permitted boundary and had his camera raised before she could reach him. He had already taken 2 steps away from the basket. The concession briefing covered exactly this scenario. He had sat through it, but I think the point of this story isn't simply that he ignored a warning. It's that he had done enough safaris that the warning had stopped being a warning and had started being something that applied to other people. That specific kind of confidence is, I think, the most dangerous thing you can carry into the bush. African lions are the largest predatory cats in Africa, with adult males weighing between 330 and 550 pounds, capable of reaching speeds near 50 miles per hour. A dominant territorial male can react to an unexpected nearby stimulus by accelerating from stillness to a full charge in only seconds. The adult male rose from the pride and covered the distance to the balloon at a full run. Mireille's account to investigators indicated the interval between the lion rising and the moment of contact was a matter of seconds. Rashad did not make it back to the basket. The lion struck him at ground level and dragged him into the grass. Mireille and the pilot retreated to the ground crew vehicle that had followed the balloon to the landing site. A concession response team reached the site approximately 40 minutes later. Rashad Devereaux was found at the edge of the tree line approximately 90 feet from where the attack had begun. He had died from injuries to the neck and upper body. The Pride had retreated into cover and was not pursued. The investigation reviewed the concession's pre-flight briefing records and found them fully compliant with Tanzanian Wildlife Authority guidelines. No action was taken against the concession. 90 feet. They found him 90 feet from where he had been standing. Mireille watched part of it from beside the balloon basket. I don't have a clean way to process that, and I genuinely don't think anyone does. Tanzania had shown what happens when one moment of certainty overrides every protocol in place. In northeastern India, the forest corridor offered no protocol at all, just a private helicopter grounded at the wrong hour on the wrong stretch of land. It was November 11th, 2017, on the interior tracks of a private tea estate in the Golaghat district of Assam, northeastern India. The estate's tracks crossed several kilometers of working tea garden before passing through a strip of dense secondary forest that connected a river wildlife reserve on one side to a larger corridor on the other. They were used primarily by estate vehicles during the harvest season and saw little traffic once the peak picking period wound down in October. By mid-November, the interior was largely quiet. Privansh Kaul, 49, was a pharmaceutical entrepreneur based in New Delhi. He had built a mid-sized generics manufacturing company in his 30s into one of the more profitable specialty drug producers in the region before stepping back from day-to-day management. He had extended family in Assam and traveled north most autumns. Combining the family visit with extended aerial tours of the tea-growing districts, he found calming after months in Delhi. He chartered a private helicopter for these trips, a 4-seat twin-engine aircraft operated out of Yorhat, and had been using the same estate's private landing area for 2 years. Traveling with him was his daughter, Ananya, 22, who was completing a postgraduate architecture program in Bangalore and had extended her break to join the trip. She had flown with her father to the estate the previous year and was familiar with the general route. The helicopter developed a mechanical caution indicator approximately 4 kilometers into the forested section of the estate's low-altitude transit path. The pilot set down in a small cleared section of the estate track where the canopy opened enough to permit a safe landing. According to Ananya's account given to Assam Forest Department officers, her father exited the helicopter to allow the pilot to inspect the rotor assembly from the outside. The track was empty in both directions. The light was fading. Late afternoon, the forest canopy overhead reducing visibility further. The forested section ran alongside a dry seasonal stream bed that wildlife surveys conducted by the estate had identified as an active movement corridor between the river reserve and the larger forest block to the east. Pug marks had been recorded by estate staff during the previous 3 seasons, and encounters on interior estate roads had been noted in estate management logs. The estate had not posted any signage along the track's forested section. Privansh had almost certainly made this flight without giving the forested corridor particular thought. It looked like every other stretch of land between tea rows and tree line, narrow, familiar, unremarkable. There was no sign, no barrier, no visible signal that the stream bed behind the track shoulder was anything other than background. Here is what stays with me about this story. He was not doing anything extraordinary. He stepped out because the helicopter told him to stop. A caution indicator and a forest corridor and a specific time of day. None of those things are individually alarming. But that afternoon, they were exactly the right combination in exactly the wrong place. Bengal tigers are the most numerous tiger subspecies and account for most documented tiger-related human fatalities across the Indian subcontinent. Adult males typically weigh between 400 and 550 pounds and exceed 9 feet in length. Solitary ambush predators, they favor forest edges and stream corridors, often watching a target for extended periods before closing the distance with remarkable speed and silence. Ananya's account described her father standing at the front of the helicopter for several minutes before she noticed movement at the tree line to the right of the track, approximately where the stream bed ran parallel to the shoulder. She called out. According to her account, the tiger emerged from the tree line and covered the distance to the track before her father had fully turned. The attack was immediate. Ananya remained inside the helicopter throughout. She directed the pilot to fly the helicopter back along the route toward the estate's main facility, despite the caution indicator still showing, reported the incident to the estate manager, and a Forest Department response team reached the site approximately 90 minutes later. Drag marks into the undergrowth confirmed the attack sequence. Privansh Kaul's remains were recovered recovered 40 meters from the track next morning. A large male tiger was identified from pug marks and left unculled under standard Forest Department protocol. She flew that helicopter on a caution indicator for 90 minutes, got back to the estate, reported everything clearly, and it still took 90 minutes before anyone reached the spot. The forest doesn't wait on anyone's schedule, and it doesn't hold anything back for those who stop inside it. Assam's forest corridor had closed in around Prevanchkaul, while his helicopter sat cooling on a tea estate track. In the Waterberg of South Africa, there would be no mechanical failure, no warning indicator, no dramatic decision, just a man walking 40 meters in the dark. It was February 8th, 2020, at a private unfenced bush camp in the Waterberg region of Limpopo Province, South Africa. The camp occupied approximately 2 acres of cleared Mayambo woodland at the base of a rocky ridge and consisted of 4 canvas and timber sleeping tents, a central dining and fire structure, and a separate equipment storage tent at the perimeter. There was no fence and no perimeter lighting. The camp was accessible by a 60-kilometer dirt track from the nearest tarred road. Mobile coverage was non-existent. It operated under a private concession on an exclusive use basis. Guests had the property entirely to themselves for the duration of each booking. Wentworth Dlamini, 45, was a senior executive at a mining logistics firm headquartered in Johannesburg. He had grown up in Limpopo Province, hunted the Waterberg as a young man, completed guided walks through similar terrain, and had accumulated more nights in the African bush than most people he knew professionally. He booked the camp for unstructured field time away from Johannesburg and traveled with professional photography gear, including high-end cameras and long lenses, storing equipment in the perimeter tent during extended bush stays. He had arrived 2 days earlier with his wife, Zodwa, 41, and their eldest son, Lwando, 17, for a long weekend stay. The camp's field staff, a cook and 2 camp hands from a village 6 kilometers out, traveled in each morning and returned home before dark, as was standard for the concession. From roughly 6 in the evening onward, the family was entirely alone on the property. On the second evening, after dinner at the central fire, the family had returned to their sleeping tent for the night. At some point after Zodwa and Lwando had settled, Wentworth left the tent on foot. The equipment storage tent was 40 meters from the sleeping tent at the bush edge. Zodwa said he planned to retrieve his long lens from it before sleep to photograph the ridge at dawn. No torch was found near the equipment tent or anywhere near the scene. I think about this one a lot. He had more experience in this landscape than most people who visit a camp like this. He had hunted it, he had walked it, and I genuinely wonder whether that experience made him less careful rather than more. Whether spending a lifetime in the bush made walking 40 meters through unfenced woodland at night feel like absolutely nothing worth thinking about. That might be exactly how it happened. Leopards are the most widely distributed large wildcats found across Africa and parts of Asia. Adult males in southern Africa typically weigh between 130 and 200 pounds. Though smaller than lions, they are exceptionally powerful and can carry prey heavier than themselves. Nocturnal and solitary, they thrive in rocky, wooded terrain, and the Waterberg supports one of the country's higher leopard densities. The camp's field staff arrived at first light and found Zodwa and Lwando at the central structure. A search of the property began immediately. Evidence near the equipment storage tent, disturbed soil, drag marks leading toward the base of the ridge, and material consistent with clothing indicated an encounter had occurred at the tent's edge. Wentworth Dlamini's body was recovered approximately 30 meters from the equipment tent in dense cover at the base of the ridge. The injuries were consistent with a leopard attack, according to findings documented by Limpopo Province wildlife authorities. The absence of a torch was formally noted in the investigation report. The concession was reviewed and found compliant with all applicable safety guidelines. No enforcement action was issued. The specific animal was not identified, and no cull was undertaken. The investigation concluded cause of death as animal attack, with contributing circumstances identified as unsupervised foot movement outside the sleeping structure after dark in an area of documented and active leopard territory. The staff found Zodwa and Lwando sitting at the table at first light. Wentworth had walked out to retrieve his camera lens 40 meters after dark in the Waterberg without a torch. I think experience in the bush is only useful if you let it keep making you careful. The moment it starts making you comfortable instead, everything it taught you works against you. The Waterberg had claimed Wentworth Dlamini in the space between the fire and the equipment tent. In Australia's Northern Territory, the final boundary would be just 6 feet of dry ground between a man's boots and the edge of the water. It was September 4th, 2016, on a remote floodplain in the Northern Territory of Australia, approximately 300 miles southeast of Darwin. The dry season had reduced the region's network of seasonal wetlands to a series of isolated billabongs and shrinking channels, concentrating wildlife and the predators that hunted it around the remaining water. The area was accessible by a rough station track crossing private pastoral land before reaching the floodplain edge, or by air, the only practical option for those traveling from the coast within a day. There were no facilities, no mobile coverage, and no other travelers likely to pass through. The nearest outpost with communications infrastructure sat roughly 90 miles back along the track. Dara Whitfield, 58, was a mining entrepreneur from Perth, Western Australia. He had made his fortune in nickel and copper extraction and had retired partially at 54, redirecting his time into extended remote expeditions across Australia's interior, increasingly by private helicopter, which gave him the access and range that no ground vehicle could match. He flew a Robinson R-66 helicopter, maintained via a Perth operator, using it for remote travel across northern Australia, keeping detailed logs and always preparing carefully for conditions. His wife, Beverly, 54, accompanied him on most major expeditions. She was experienced with remote travel and was the primary operator of the satellite communications equipment the two carried. They had done a version of this floodplain route the previous year without incident. Warning signs indicating saltwater crocodile presence had been posted at the station track's entrance, approximately 12 miles back. The Northern Territory's Crocodile Management Authority installs these signs across the region's water bodies during the dry season, when crocodile concentrations at reduced water sources increase sharply. Dara had flown over the sign on his approach. At mid-afternoon, on September 4th, he set the helicopter down on a dry, flat section of floodplain approximately 150 feet from a large billabong, fringed with paperbark trees and tall, dry grass. A flock of magpie geese fed at the shallow far margin. A small group of feral horses stood at the water's edge roughly 80 feet to the right. The water was still, the light clean, and the scene read as calm in every visible register. Dara stepped out of the helicopter with his camera and moved toward the bank for a better angle on the horses. He stopped approximately 6 feet from the water's edge. The visual red of that billabong is what concerns me most about this story. Still water, birds feeding calmly, horses standing at the edge. Nothing in that picture sends a threat signal. But a large saltwater crocodile in still dark water is effectively invisible from 6 feet away. The horses not being spooked probably felt like confirmation that the water was clear. It wasn't confirmation of anything. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth, with some adults in northern Australia exceeding 18 feet in length and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. They are responsible for most fatal crocodile attacks in Australia and are considered apex predators with a proven history of attacking humans near water. During the dry season, they concentrate around isolated billabongs in greater numbers. Almost invisible in still water, they can remain motionless before launching with explosive speed, striking before a victim can react. According to Beverly's account to Northern Territory Police, Dara was crouching slightly at the bank to adjust his camera angle when the crocodile came out of the water directly in front of him. She described the event as near instantaneous. He was at the edge, and then the crocodile was there, and he was not. Beverly, who had also stepped out of the helicopter and was standing near it at the time, ran back and activated the satellite emergency beacon immediately. Northern Territory Police and emergency response personnel reached the site the following morning, having navigated the station track through the night. A saltwater crocodile management team accompanied them. A large individual was located in the billabong by midday. Dara Whitfield's remains were recovered during the subsequent management operation, and he was confirmed deceased at the scene. The investigation found the warning signage at the track entrance had been in place and clearly visible. Beverly Whitfield sustained no physical injuries. She activated that beacon the moment she could. It still took until the following morning for anyone to arrive, and that is not a failure on anyone's part. That is simply the reality of where they were. In remote Australia, response time is not measured in minutes. It is measured in hours, and by the time anyone gets there, the outcome has been decided for a long time.